Humans and chimpanzees. Are we really 99% similar in our DNA? That's our topic for today. Hi, I'm Keaton Halley, here with Dr. Matthew Cserhati, one of our newest speakers in our CMI US office.
Okay,
Hi, Matthew.
Greetings, everybody. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, glad you could join us. And as I mentioned, our topic today is the alleged genetic similarity of humans and chimpanzees. Even your average person on the street has heard this claim that humans and chimps share 99% or 98%, sometimes the figure is, of our DNA. So we're going to talk about whether that's true or false and the implications it has for our worldview. So, Matthew, do you know where that figure actually came from originally?
Okay, so originally this figure was determined by a researcher called John Alquist as an evolutionist. And he said that this was based on an older, cruder technology involving DNA hybridization.
Yeah, this was like back in the 1970s, I believe. Is that right?
Back in the 1990s. It was decades ago. It was a very crude technology.
And that was before they had actually even sequenced the human genome or even the
chimpanzee genome. So this was based not on sequential technology, whereas they've sequenced the whole entire chimpanzee genome as well as the human genome sequence. And when we look at newer data, other research studies show that this sequentially, when we talk about sequence similarity, we get numbers as low as 96.5%, even as low as 87%, or even as low as 70%. The interesting thing is that when they sequenced the chimpanzee genome and they aligned it to human, they found big differences between the two genomes. In fact, only 70% of the chimpanzee genome actually aligned to the human genome. It's a very big gap. There are lots of missing regions between the two genomes. Yeah. So this is very significant.
And right, in effect, Matthew, you're saying that it's almost like an urban legend that humans and chimps share 99% similarity in their DNA. This is something that the figure keeps getting kicked around, and everybody knows that it's true, and yet it's essentially a myth.
So actually, let's take a look at this 1%. The human genome sequence is 3 billion base pairs. And even if this 1% figure is true, let's take a look at the numbers.
Yeah.
This would correspond to several hundred genes which are present in human as opposed to chimpanzee. And this is actually quite a lot. This could be responsible for quite a bit of difference. And people, they emphasize like similarities, but there are also quite a large number of differences between chimpanzees and humans. So for example, if we look at regulatory regions, we find that a full 17%, 1/6 of all the regulatory networks in human are missing from chimpanzees. And they've actually counted the number of differing genes between chimpanzees and humans. There are about 1,400. And for example, about 10% of these genes cause differences in the brain region. And again, if you look at the brain region of chimpanzees and humans, they're very different. Yeah. There are regions in the human brain which are responsible for speech, which chimpanzees don't have. And this is also a very major difference between us and chimpanzees.
Yeah, and this is a major problem, of course, because, like you said, even if we sort of grant the assumption that we are only 1% different, that's still, we're talking about 30 million letters differences between humans and chimps today. And supposedly the evolutionists say that we had a common ancestor 6 million years ago. But can you really achieve that many differences in that? I mean, it's a long amount of time, but it's relatively short to get that many changes, right?
6 million years, according to current genetic models taking mutations into account, even 6 million years is incapable of occurring all these mutations. But we can also look at the gross similarity between chimpanzees and the human genome. For example, if you look at the Y chromosome, the chimpanzee Y chromosome is only about half the size of the human Y chromosome.
Yeah, that was a shock, right? When they discovered that
very much indeed.
The Y chromosomes were radically different between humans and chimps.
And we can also talk about chromosome number 2. Evolutionists like to point out that, or they try to point out that chimpanzee chromosome 2A and 2B, they fused to form what they think is human chromosome number 2. I think that chimpanzee chromosome 2B should be called chromosome number 3 in chimpanzees. the fact of the matter is that creation scientists, researchers, we analyzed the alleged fusion point between chromosome 2A and 2B in chimpanzee, which should correspond to in human chromosome number 2, and they found all these regulatory and all these functional elements. So, evolutionists allege that 2 chromosomes in chimpanzee fused to form a single chromosome in human.
Yeah, and for the lay audience who might not even know what chromosomes are, these are like when DNA gets all wound up together and bundled in these huge chunks.
It's like big continuous chunks of DNA, and you might remember in high school that humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, chimpanzees have 24.
Right,
and so hence the fusion.
So that's one of the differences in effect, that they actually have an extra chromosome compared to us.
Exactly.
What the evolutionists claim is that 2 of these, not in the chimpanzee, but in the common ancestor between chimps and humans, they say the other apes have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and that 2 of these fused to form human chromosome number 2.
Right, that's what they say. But upon closer examination, we find that this alleged fusion point between the 2 chromosomes, it's not functionless. There's a lot of functional elements in that region, meaning that it really disproves the idea that 2 chromosome ends just randomly got tacked on.
Joined together.
Really
we know chromosome fusions can happen. That they seem to be rare in nature, but an end-to-end fusion would be very.
Actually, we see these kinds of things in cancer, which is not something that would help the fitness of a given organism.
Yeah, very good. And we've written a lot more about that. We can't go into much more depth about chromosome fusion, but it's a hotly contested area between creationists and evolutionists. Maybe we should talk a bit about just what similarity would prove. That's an argument for evolution in general, that allegedly the similarities between different types of organisms down to the level of our DNA supposedly proves that therefore we have a common ancestor because we shared those same sequences.
I mean, so they say that we're 99% similar to chimpanzees. And again, this number is very contested. Different groups show different statistics. But then we're also 50% similar to bananas, or we also have genes in common with yeast. Does it make us half banana or half daffodil or whatever? It sounds ridiculous, but I mean, again, this is an error of correlation does not prove causation. That there could be another explanation behind the similarities. Another possible explanation is that the reason we have so many genes in common with chimpanzee is because that there's simply we eat the same food, and so we need similar enzymes to break down this food. So simply,
and structurally we're very similar, right? We're both mammals. We have the same sort of skeleton, and
so of course God could use genes as design elements to build up humans and chimpanzees, which just so happen to be structurally similar. Of course, I mean, if evolution is true, we'd have to show how random mutations bring about all these differences.
Yeah, and as we already mentioned, there's a major problem with getting, in the amount of time that we allegedly departed from our common ancestor with chimpanzees in 6 million years or so. That's not enough time to get all these differences.
And let's also not forget that mutations, the random changes in the DNA, and you don't get you can't rewrite a book into another book. Let's say from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven to, let's say, Tolstoy's War and Peace, simply by rewriting the letters. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, the mutations are overwhelmingly harmful, deleterious, right?
Exactly.
And,
I mean, obviously, this means that the genes contain information, and they were designed by an intelligent designer who is the triune God of the Bible.
What would you say, too? I would think there's an argument to be made that we're more than merely our DNA, right? When you look at the differences between humans and chimps on not on the level of genetics, but on the level of the phenotype and our behavior and so forth.
So exactly. I mean, again, we can also stress differences between chimpanzees and humans. Humans have speech. Chimpanzees, they've been able to learn like a repertoire of words, but they're very rote words. When chimpanzees use these, when they mimic these words, which are taught to them by humans, it's not like they expect a reward for using that word in these experiments. And also, like parrots can also mimic words. Doesn't mean that chimpanzees can use grammar or like a structured language.
They have some level of communication, but it's not the same as human speech.
They only use single words as opposed to sentences, which humans, I mean, we also have art, we think abstractly.
Yeah, we have creativity and so forth, and obviously we worship God, which animals don't. So there are massive differences, between the animal kingdom. Even the brightest animals, birds and dolphins and chimpanzees and so forth,
they can't even come close
humans
to.
Exceed.
They can't even come close to humans.
Yeah,
and so I think that there's a lot of evidence which we've covered, and I think we can make a lot of use of it as Christians in our witness to our friends and colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since, as we've said, everybody has heard this claim that humans and chimps are 99% similar, might be an interesting talking point that could open doors to the gospel, to share with people that the scripture is true, that the Bible's testimony is correct when it says that we are.
Exactly. And I think this just shows that with newer and newer evidence, science really proves the Bible as opposed to evolution.
Yeah.
This myth has been around for so long, and I think it really has to be put to rest. That this is a truth that we were made in God's image. We're very separate from the animals.
Yeah,
there is no continuation between chimpanzees and humans. Again, let's stress differences as opposed to similarities.
Yeah.
And so,
one other point that we should maybe make, Matthew, is that the scientist that you mentioned, who was at one time an evolutionist, Dr. John Alquist, when he gave us, he was one of the people that was instrumental in giving us that 99% figure originally. Well, he's since become a Bible-believing creationist.
That is
Christian.
True. Yes, and I've worked with him on a paper before. So
yeah, we interviewed him as well in our Creation magazine.
Yeah.
And so if people want to be exposed to that kind of content, well, sign up for Creation magazine, right?
And I think this also goes to show that this evidence, it convinces high-level scientists as well.
Yeah.
Many high-level scientists, including myself, when we're faced with the evidence, when we put together the pieces, we see that really the Bible is better supported as opposed to evolutionary theory.
Yeah, and Dr. Alquist himself now regards the evidence of human-ape similarity as consistent with his biblical worldview.
Right.
Now, if people want to get access to that interview with Dr. Alquist, well, we will put a link below in our show notes, as well as other links to relevant articles related to the content we discussed today. And hey, if you made it to the end of this episode, well, congratulations. Thanks for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation, Matthew.
Thank you very much.
And if you enjoyed the content today, I hope you will just take the opportunity to rate our podcast. That will help us to be found by others. Thanks for listening.